Hello there everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Exploring UXW Bill's Forgotten Computers. In the first episode of this particular series, which I hope to be filling out with more computers in the not too distant future, I will be presenting for your viewing and exploration pleasure a Compaq Prolinea 575e model computer. I actually do know the history of this system as concerns how it found its way to me. This computer originally belonged to the aunt, my dad's sister, who drove the 1987 Volvo 240D automobile. She gave this to me about 10 years ago, along with several other computer systems, but at the time I was much more into 286, 386, 486, and XT PC class systems as proper vintage hardware. After all, when one's daily driver laptop, as recently as March of 2005, is a Compaq LTE 5000 clocked at that same 75 megahertz of this desktop computer, well, it's awfully hard to consider such hardware as properly vintage. So what we're going to do today is to take a look at this system, see what it might happen to do, and I'm also going to go ahead and clean it up because this has been sitting in a very remote, very dark, very much forgotten corner of my basement. I know it's hard to believe that I would ever have such a thing, but I'm not joking when I say that the computer mess room, which I don't show on video because I frankly don't want to deal with the fallout from the community of internet dunces at large, well, looks like someone bombed a Radio Shack in there. So that and the forgotten corners of my basement will remain safely off of video, and the matter is closed. Not open to further discussion. Thank you very much. Anyway, the first thing we're going to do, getting back onto the topic here, is to go ahead and clean this poor thing up, because it certainly deserves that. I did actually go ahead and pick some of the hairier aspects of dust off of this system, but it could still use a good wipe down, so I've got the paper towel here. And I've got the cleaner that came most readily to hand. This is Liebman brand all-purpose cleaner. It's new. It's also grease cutting, although I don't think we have that particular problem to contend with. This is probably great cleaner, but I'm going to say a bad thing about it right away. A lot of times you can reuse or refill these jars with new cleaner, especially if you buy a larger bottle of it, like a refill kit or something. And while I'm not a huge raving greenie kind of a person, I do appreciate being able to reuse things, and I certainly do recycle stuff in order to lessen my burden on the environment. The trouble is, short of engaging in the time-honored sport of violence toward product packaging, you can't actually open this. I suppose that in the name of child safety? Okay, it did not do that when I was playing with this at the kitchen table the other day. Alright, I take back my commentary on that. I guess it's supposed to be child safe. I couldn't get that to open up for anything yesterday. Well, that's just the kind of thing that happens in a UXW Bill video. And I'm going to leave it in because I know you'll all get a kick out of seeing it happen. So let's go ahead and clean up this computer. It could definitely use that, don't you think? Looks like someone actually hand wrote something on top of this computer, but it came off very nicely. And it looks like this machine will clean up nicely. Doesn't look like it has any serious scrapes, scratches, dings, or scars on its casing. Just suffering from years and years of neglect, being forgotten in the basement. I'm sure it's probably going to be mad at me when I power it on. Just as soon as I've got this casing wiped down, including the front of it, which is probably now most conveniently off camera, we'll go ahead and plug this machine in, see what happens, see if the power supply goes bang. I'm going to do that right here at the kitchen table while I've got it handy, because that's just the most appropriate thing you can possibly do with a kitchen table. And since I am here on the kitchen table, you would be correct in thinking that once again, I do in fact have the house to myself. So here's my power cord. Oh, before I do that, I guess we should have at least a cursory postal inspection. Luckily, for us at least, this machine has thumb screws on the back of the case, and while they are most certainly killing tight, I think I can manage. You'll see, I've got one left to go. And of course, it's the last one that's the loosest of the bunch. That really does about figure, doesn't it? Alright, look inside here. I hope the key lock's not set on this thing. Okay, look inside here. See what we've got. And the good news is, it's the complete polar opposite of the way it looked on the outside. It's just about spotlessly clean. There's some dust here at the front. Don't know how well that'll show up on camera because I don't have the flip-out view screen set to where I can easily monitor things, but such is life, I guess. So just in case it does decide to do its impression of a firecracker, we'll slap the case back on, make sure the power button's not pushed in. I haven't had a power supply blow up in a while, and a couple of them that I thought really would have not, including a 286 that's been sitting out on the breezeway where the bird was the other day for at least since 2006, I would imagine, since my room was remodeled. Alright, make sure the voltage selector is set properly. So are you ready for this? Explosion test! Well, it didn't blow up. I guess that means we get to move on to the next level. Take it downstairs, hook it up, and see what it does. Okay, I've gone ahead and moved down here to the computer workroom. It's funny how this repurposed pool table looks so large until you get a couple of things on it, and then suddenly you don't have very much room anymore, or so it seems. As you can see, I've hooked this computer up to a much more modern Samsung SyncMaster 15-inch flat panel display. I could have gone to the trouble of hauling out an old school CRT monitor just to make this a little bit more period correct. But as someone else in this computer's past has gone ahead and modified various things about it, which we'll get into in a little more detail here in just a bit, well, I decided I didn't really need to be all that bothered about the maximum period correct authenticity. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a physical tour of the computer here. We'll start with the most obvious place, and that would be the front panel. We have the Compaq logo here and the declaration of this machine's model. It's a Prolinea 575e, as previously mentioned. Got some interesting little vent holes that actually do appear to be backed up by slotted metal in the case, so it looks like they are effective. This is a very understated and spare front panel for a computer, but then again, for those of you who are not familiar with computers of this age, systems such as this predate things like front panel headphone jacks, microphone connectors, and USB ports. In fact, there's not even any USB hardware on the motherboard in this system. That was still a number of years off, and even by 1997 or so, when systems started to show up with USB hardware, well, oftentimes it required a breakout that many system assemblers for white box computers simply didn't bother with. And of course, branded computers having USB ports available on the front panel were still a number of more years off further than that. Originally, this system came with a 3.5-inch high-density 1.44 megabyte floppy drive, so it is most definitely a real computer. You know, a lot of people really get up in arms when I say real computers have floppy drives, legacy, and PS2 ports. They don't realize that that's by and large intended to be funny. Relax, chill out, enjoy life a little bit. Don't be so serious. Takes all the fun out of the room. Now, there are definitely some people out there that'll be watching this video that do not like branded computers. And I think one of the reasons that comes up so often has mostly to do with the fact that at one point in time, a lot of branded computer manufacturers engaged in various proprietary shenanigans so that while their systems could usually accommodate things such as standard expansion cards and such, well, they couldn't accommodate regular drives, or sometimes they were a little offbeat. See Packard Bell systems when it came to interacting with other hardware, and sometimes you needed special mounting rails. Luckily, a lot of those shenanigans are definitely a thing of the past. Unfortunately, they have definitely left a bad taste in some people's mouths, and that's why I think that to this very day, a lot of people will talk down about branded computers. Now, that does completely overlook the concept of the enthusiast community, overclockers, water coolers, case modders, that kind of thing. But you know what? I have to be honest, no offense to any of those people, but I am totally not interested in any of that stuff. I like my computers to be reliable and stable. I've never even overclocked anything terribly hard. In fact, the only overclocked system that's in my possession right now is that nominally 75 megahertz Hewlett-Packard Vectra VL, whose CPU is running at 133 megahertz. It actually is stable, and it doesn't have anything more than air drawn across the heatsink attached to the CPU. But getting back to this, you can definitely see that this computer suffers from the whole slightly proprietary engineering bit of shenanigans that, like I said previously, is a bit of a thing of the past, because this NEC multi-spin 4V CD-ROM drive, well, it doesn't really fit very well. You may have noticed earlier when I was taking the case off of this unit that the front bezel of the drive wants to go with the case because of the clearance issues as it's pulled forward and off of the system. Speaking of the case, let's go ahead and just have a quick look inside here. I've got to find a keyboard for this system. I could hook up my Dell AT101W, but in case something is wrong with this computer, I'd really rather not end up pooching that keyboard, especially since I think it would run me at least 40 bucks to go ahead and replace it. As you can see here, the heart of the system has been exposed. So what do we have here? Well, we have the typical kinds of engineering that are oftentimes seen in branded computer systems of the time. There's not really a standard form factor here, and you have a riser card at the back that offers some expansion slots. There's also a great deal of integration on the motherboard, and while that's commonplace nowadays in this ATX era, generic white box systems from this thing's time period, before ATX had really taken a hold and become a standard like it is today, well, those systems oftentimes relied on add-in expansion cards for all of their hardware functions, whereas branded computers, well, you can see there's a whole lot of integration here. We'll start with the video. This is a Cirrus Logic video chip, and again, with the theme of highly integrated things here, the Cirrus Logic video chips are very highly integrated. They are basically everything you need for a computer video subsystem except the video memory. The random access memory to digital analog converter, the RAM DAC, is on board the chip. In those days, in the days of this system, it was much more common to see those external, although they were starting to disappear and be folded in to the graphics processor. This thing also is capable of performing various 2D acceleration functions. Cirrus Logic lived just barely long enough, and as far as their participation in the graphics business was concerned, that they did actually produce a couple of AGP chips and even some with nominal 3D acceleration functions, but they were very buggy, and like all the other major players of the time, well, they soon got out of the market and sold the product line off, and these days it has all but been forgotten, except for the occasions when a chip like this shows up in an older computer. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, I really do miss the days when there was actually competition in the graphics market. These days, ATI and NVIDIA are pretty much it. Intel's still hanging around with their integrated chipset graphics, and while Intel did once upon a time do a standalone graphics accelerator, it was a major flop and they've never revisited, although they did talk about it in the early 2010s, maybe late 2000s, I'm not 100% sure on the time frame, with the so-called Larrabee project. The only other independent graphics company that's still hanging around in the background is, if you can believe it, Matrox Corporation of Canada. They have left the standard desktop graphics and 3D business behind, and they provide solutions that are for special purpose computing, such as medical imaging and things along those lines. But they are still around. So there is still some competition, but definitely not as much as there used to be back in the day, with companies like Cirrus Logic, Sing Labs, S3, just so many companies, Headland Technology, which later became a part of LSI Logic, Texas Instruments, Western Digital, yes, the hard drive maker, even had a couple of video graphics chips back in the day. So there's the video memory. I have an upgrade connection, an overlay feature connector. This was rarely used, but what it allowed for was things like television tuner cards, later DVD decoders in hardware before computers were powerful enough to do MPEG decoding in software. They could basically inject and snoop the video signal coming from the video processor in this machine. and they could do things like inject a video overlay window, and then the whole final result was sent out in mixed form through the random access memory digital to analog converter and ultimately onto your VGA monitor. Then we have video memory upgrade, connectors here, pin headers, pin style headers. Hopefully those don't need much of an explanation. Compaq had a bit of a love with permanently attached batteries on these system boards. This was a great idea when these machines were new, but unless you want to break out the soldering iron, or in the case of this system, it does look like Compaq was nice enough to include an external battery header. Well, when this system's battery dies, you definitely might be heading for something of a problem. And then next to that, we have the little piezoelectric squeaker can PC speaker. A little surprising to see such a minimal beeper in a system like this, because even in the early Pentium era, to which this machine belongs, well, PC speakers did still have some fairly regular uses. And then as far as the memory goes, we have SIM sockets here, 72-pin SIM sockets. In a Pentium class machine such as this, these have to be installed in matched pairs per bank, because the Pentium processor's memory pathway is, if I remember correctly, 64 bits wide, and each SIM is nominally only 32 bits wide. It looks like maybe these first two SIMs are 8 megabyte units, and the second set of SIMs, although they are much more densely populated than the first, they are labeled as IBM types, so they may have come from a different system, although they do also have a Compaq part number on them, so maybe it was some kind of a semi-vendor approved replacement from a well-known memory supplier like Kingston or PNY Technologies. But as you can see, these two are 8 megabyte 70 nanosecond modules. Kind of surprising to see 70 nanosecond modules in an early Pentium system like this, because a lot of them could run their memory at 60 nanoseconds. But this system also has memory built into the motherboard in the form of these chips right here. They're pretty dusty. We'll see if we can wipe one off. And it looks like this system would be forever limited to running its memory at 70 nanoseconds, because that's the speed rating of the chips on the motherboard. And if you wonder how I'm determining that, well, it's very simple. We have the part number of the memory module here. This is a Texas Instruments chip. The lot and date code information down here, manufacturer's name, TI, and then the -70 indicates the timing on these particular chips. Maybe they could be overclocked, but it's probably a moot point. Moving on a little bit further down the line, it looks like there is some sort of a semi-custom chip here with a Compaq part number on it. Bears a 1977 copyright from Intel, so I'm guessing there is a microcontroller core at its heart. Possibly something like an 8032, but hard to tell for sure, and I certainly haven't tried to look it up. I would be very surprised if any kind of information is available. Right next to that, we have the system's ROM BIOS chip. This is where the computer, of course, goes to seek its operating instructions when power is first applied, and what ultimately serves to initialize all the hardware and then ultimately pass control to an operating system. And again, a lot of you who watch this channel are probably very well aware of that, but I'm also trying a slightly different tactic with this video, catering to some of the less technical and younger members of the audience that may be curious about older PC hardware, or even some newer PC hardware that still uses a conventional BIOS to start up from. There are a number of empty pads on this motherboard. Hard to tell what all of these are for. Most likely some kind of multifunction peripheral chip, even though there were a lot of integrated peripherals on this board, such as the video and the parallel serial ports, floppy drive controller, all that good stuff. Well, there still wasn't a whole lot of integration going on here. It is entirely possible that this system had some kind of integrated telephone modem or Ethernet connectivity. Those things were seldom seen on older computers like this, but sometimes they were added cost options that you could get if you wanted to. We'll go ahead and turn on the Handycam light here as we go spelunking further into the depths of the system. Here we have a standard Microsystems floppy disk controller and a multi-I/O chip. This is probably attached internally to the system's ISA bus, because the low pin count bus was still a few years off. Then we have some other chip back here, a CMD Technologies. That's probably a dual-channel PCI IDE controller, something that these days would be built into the south bridge of a chipset. Kind of surprising to see that as a separate part. but maybe in the case of this system's design, the chipset was not capable of doing something that Compaq's motherboard engineers wanted to do. Speaking of the chipset, you're looking at it right here, spread across no less than 4 different integrated circuits, and again, these will be of somewhat custom design. VLSI semiconductor, which I believe was later absorbed by Philips Electronics, probably now known as NXP Semiconductor, if any vestiges of VLSI still exist. They were a manufacturer of custom chips of all kinds. They did have a couple of semi-standard PC chipsets of the time. Again, you can see that in the time that has passed, there has been a lot greater integration take place as components got cheaper and more standardized than they were in this particular system. The slot that you're looking at here, this long brown slot, is for an optional level 2 cache module. Now ordinarily when the computer industry comes up with acronyms, I think they try to at least make them have an aura of mystery about them. Not so in this case. This is called a coast module. That's what goes in this slot. I believe they were available in sizes up to 1 megabyte of level 2, but the only ones I've seen with any commonality are the 256 kilobyte modules. And what does COAST stand for? Brace yourselves, folks. This is a real shocker. It stands for Cache on a Stick. Stop me if I'm going too fast for you here. Underneath this large green heatsink, we have a couple of, we don't have a couple of anything, we have one microprocessor containing a couple thousand, if not million, transistors. Don't know exactly how many transistors are on the die of an original Pentium chip. And then up here in the expansion slots, the two that are most visible already are standard ISA. I don't know if this computer has any PCI slots. Again, it would have been made at a time, according to the date codes, it would have been probably very early 1996 when this system was finished and sent out the door to its expectant owner, its eager owner maybe I should say. And by that time you would think that everything would have PCI slots, but a couple of major system vendors definitely weren't doing that, and this could be an older board design than the component dates indicate, because Compaq looks to have gotten a lot of mileage out of this. I've seen this same board used in other Compaq computers of the time with slight adaptations, added onboard hardware, different configurations and stuff like that. And if I get around to making more of these videos, well, you just might be able to count yourself lucky enough to see one of those systems demonstrated, and then you can rewatch this video and compare and contrast for yourself. But up here we have a late model Sound Blaster 16 card. This is the version with the built-in IDE interface. I don't believe this was original to this system. I'm sure it was an add-on, just like the CD-ROM drive. You can see the front panel's trying to sneak off of that again. In fact, it's very slightly busticated, probably because of the fact that in the past people have had the case off of this computer, and there's no way to avoid tweaking the front panel of the CD-ROM drive. And it is a straight-out ISA bus machine all the way through, which definitely limits your expansion options. You could forget putting a higher performance video adapter like an early 3D card in this machine, or DVD decoder, USB add-in, because all of those were PCI. Nope, wait, I have told you wrong. There is a lone PCI slot there. It's a combination ISA slot. So you could do a little bit of upgrading with this system. You could at least put a USB host adapter in it or something like that, but you'd have to choose because there is only one PCI slot. Got a modem here. This was probably standard Compaq issue. I would guess this is probably 14.4 kilobits per second at best. Got the lens cap snagged on the case there. We have a legend discussing what is present on the motherboard. If you want to try and read this, I can't guarantee that you will be able to do so. Well, you can pause the video at this particular point. Likewise, if we go down a little bit, you can also read about the configuration jumpers that control the various aspects of this machine. We were still a long ways off from things like automatic processor speed detection and stuff like that. You actually have to set the base frequency and the multiplier, the CPU core to bus speed ratio. So you could overclock this system relatively easily, even though it's a branded computer, and those typically aren't very friendly to that sort of thing. Then we have the Compaq power supply. Do we get a total current output rating? Yes, we do. Total outputs on this machine are 145 watts maximum. And one thing that I get on a lot of my videos where I discuss using older computers in newer projects, systems a little bit more powerful and well off than this one is, well, I get a lot of people that come out of the woodwork and say, "Oh, old computers use so much power." Well, that's not really true, folks. I have done the math here. I've had measurement instrumentation hooked up to an old computer doing a network-attached storage function and a dedicated network-attached storage device in the form of a Linksys NSL-U2. Both systems, the HP Vectra Pentium Pro that you've seen in a previous video, as well as the Linksys NSL-U2, they both pulled about 55 watts of power to do the work that they were doing. So there's really nothing to say there. And yeah, a modern computer will get more out of the power it does use, but if you don't need all those extra CPU cycles, there's fundamentally no difference. Simple logic, people. Sorry, I got on a bit of a soapbox there. Rounding out the components inside this system, we have a Seagate hard drive, ST3630A. Going to guess that's a 600 some odd megabyte hard drive, which would suggest that this machine has capability of handling drives over 528 megabytes in size. Definitely something that was a bit of a bugaboo back in the day. You could end up buying yourself a lovely 2.1 or 1 gigabyte hard drive, and suddenly you'd find out that it didn't work. And it took the system manufacturers and the BIOS coders a long time to finally get their heads together and decide that maybe they ought to quit imposing limitations on the size of hard drives, because those points were eventually going to be reached and they were going to cause trouble for people. And so these days, you know, we had issues at 528, we had issues at 2.1 gigabytes, then sometimes 3, and then 8.4, just went on and on and on. But these days we have 48-bit LBA in most of our systems, and that should hold us for quite a while, I would think. Don't know what happens when you get beyond that, but maybe we'll get to find out someday in the not-too-distant future if hard drive capacities continue to go up just like they are today. But the thing that you did to work around this problem back in the day, as again, those of you who are old hands at this like myself will happen to know, was that you used something called drive overlay software. You set the parameters as close as you could get them in the system's BIOS, hopefully got it to accept the drive without locking up or doing anything creative like that along the way. And then when you'd done that, you installed the drive overlay software, and it actually replaced or patched the BIOS's disk handling software interrupt routines with ones that could handle the larger drive capacity, and then you installed your operating system as per normal. Kind of a kludge, but it definitely worked. Look again at the power supply real quickly here. You can see the power connectors actually go into the riser, which we'll take just one more quick look at before I button this thing up, turn it on, and give you the demonstration that I'm sure you're all waiting for. You can see there are some interesting things on here. This is not a completely passive riser. There are a couple of resistor network integrated circuits here. RN1, 2, 3, and 4. Interestingly, they're not numbered sequentially. Kind of surprising. Here's the primary IDE channel. There's the floppy drive connector, and then there's the second IDE channel. So that pretty much rounds out the hardware of this system. Only other thing I could take the time to point out readily off the top of my head, I mentioned this CMD technology integrated circuit earlier. This is a PCI dual channel IDE controller. Some of these chips have a bug, a hardware bug, that prevents them from being utilized with anything other than a single device on an IDE cable, and that's definitely more than a modest limitation, especially if you have a system with just one IDE port in it. Luckily, this system does not appear to be so impacted because we have the hard drive and the CD-ROM drive both hooked up to the same IDE channel. And while that might exact a performance penalty in a system like this, probably wasn't that big of a deal. Although for best performance back in the day, you'd run your CD-ROM drives from a separate IDE channel than your hard drives, especially if you had a direct memory access capable controller, as some early CD-ROM drives could not handle being addressed in any other way than through programmed I/O, which is much slower as it requires the computer's central processing unit to do all of the work. So let's go ahead, pop the cover back on this thing, and give it a real run-up, a proper smoke test, if you will. We'll see if anything blows up along the way. Let me just preface this part of the video by saying that should this system decide to blow up, you're certainly going to know it if it does. So without any further ado, smoke test! No explosion, at least. See if we've got any video. Looks like we do. See if I was right. If each one of those sims is 8 megabytes in size. Should add up to 32 megabytes. Yep, that is exactly how much memory we have. Slip my hand back into the Handycam strap here. And we'll just see what this thing goes ahead and decides to do. A lot of Compaq machines from this era will actually beep twice when they pass their power on self-test, so don't be alarmed if that happens to yours. But it looks like it's hanging around. I don't think it's terribly happy. Shouldn't be taking that long. I heard the hard drive spin up. So I don't know what's causing that. Maybe some kind of a hardware conflict. Maybe it's one of those machines that won't finish its power on self-test if the battery is depleted. Although other Compaq machines of this era certainly have. And believe it or not, I have yet to run across one of these machines, no matter how long it's been in storage, that actually has a depleted soldered battery on the motherboard. Probably a good thing, because I expect, like the old rechargeable nickel-cadmium batteries of years past, that if you leave those lithium batteries alone long enough, they will leak. So if yours is dead, you might want to take this opportunity to desolder it or pry it off the motherboard. Meanwhile, I guess we'll start this thing over again, see if it's any more cooperative. I thought this machine worked when it was given to me, but maybe I was wrong about that. The CD-ROM drive certainly doesn't sound happy. Oh, well, at least now we've got an error during the power on self-test. I did go ahead and find a cheapo rubber dome keyboard just in case this thing decided to immediately execute the halt and catch fire routine the moment I turned it on. I wonder if the keyboard works anyway. Okay. Or not. Be quiet. That could be gumming up the power on self-test. Maybe this keyboard's, come to think of it, I think this keyboard does have a problem. I think that's why it was in a box in the other room. Should have been thrown away, but you know me. Hopefully a different keyboard leads to a new beginning. Let's find out. That CD-ROM drive still doesn't sound very happy, but who cares? I have no idea what kind of operating system might be on this computer. Let's see. Well, either this keyboard doesn't work, or I lied to you earlier about being able to interrupt the power on self-test's memory count. It's not a huge memory count, so I guess I'll live. But I really did think this keyboard worked. I just never used it because it's got this stupid large enter key. Let's see if we can go into computer setup or something equally interesting. Yes we can. And like the Compaq Presario and other machines from this particular era in Compaq's history, this uses a hidden partition on the hard drive to store all of its setup and diagnostic utilities. If you don't have that utility on the hard drive for some reason, or you're using a hard drive that this machine can't natively address at its proper capacity, or you have a disk overlay program, well, you'd have to do this via floppy diskette. And I think this entire suite of programs fits across 3 floppy diskettes. So not the most fun in the world, but this is another one of those early graphical BIOS setup utilities, like the AMI WinBIOS of times past. There were certainly others as well. The system configuration of your computer has been changed. The following sections have been changed. Add in devices. I don't know how I feel about that. And now the mouse seems to have stopped working. Worked for a little while, but now it's not even getting any power. That's just lovely. But there's an overview of the computer's hardware. You can see this was really designed. A lot of these BIOS setup utilities are not all that close to the Microsoft Windows GUI design, or GUI as I prefer to say it. But Compaq got pretty close with this one. So just see what some of the options in here are. You get to set your asset tag. I almost said aspect ratio. That's definitely a later concept. Enable or disable the PCI bus mastering aspect at the expense of system performance, and the escape key on this keyboard doesn't work. Well, it's just like this video. There's no escape for you. Storage devices. No 2.88 megabyte support. Indeed, it is a 630 megabyte hard drive. Oh, I keep forgetting that doesn't work. Maybe the escape key is fine and it doesn't exit the dialogues in this like I thought it used to. Numlock. Real computers have that set to on. And we do want to save that setting. Energy saver mode. Who cares about that? I'm sure that'll get me flamed. I just see it as a potential complication. VGA video. PCI VGA Snoop is a way for certain add-in cards like video capture devices to get some idea of what the state of the onboard video hardware is if they happen to need that for any reason. We have COM port, serial port 1, which is oddly enough linked with a cable coming off of the motherboard. Then we have the parallel port, and everybody these days has a parallel port in their computer, if they have a parallel port in their computer that is typically capable of several modes of operation. But with a system this old, well, you get the original compatible one-way only mode, and then you get early bidirectional support, a sort of state before things like EPP and ECP capable parallel ports existed, and greatly enhanced the port's two-way communication capabilities for things like external CD-ROM drives, external hard drives, scanners, and stuff like that. If your system did have one of those better parallel ports, it could use those devices at a much greater speed. I don't have a power on password set, don't really want one, so we'll cancel that. What do we have in terms of add-in devices? Oddly enough, it considers the onboard VGA to be an add-on device, although it does note that it is embedded. We have an ISA plug-and-play device, two of them. One of them's the modem, and it doesn't return a valid ID, but the second one does, the Creative Sound Blaster. You can configure this. ISA plug-and-play. Well, it was better than the way it used to be when you would arrange jumpers on cards that sometimes weren't even labeled correctly back in the day. But that's not to say it didn't occasionally do fun things. The number of dependencies is too large. I have no idea. And I think that boogered up the setup program. I think it just lost the plot. So I'll try and get these values in here set the way I want them, and then we'll boot this machine. I'm not going to subject you to watching all of that exciting drivel. Okay, I made my changes once again. Not going to tempt fate by looking at the expansion card options. Let's just go ahead and see what operating system this thing does indeed boot into. Should be interesting. And I know that earlier Compaq systems allow you to abort the power on self-test for the memory. And so I'm guessing that indeed the escape key is just bad on this keyboard. We could try the age-old diagnostic trick of just whacking the crap out of it with something. And that might have worked. It is only here on the UXW Bill channel that you will find such uncouth methods of treating computer hardware. Alright, are we going to boot? Thinking about it. Want to place bets on the OS? Windows 98! Wow! I would have thought this thing was running Windows 95. Evidently it was in use a lot further than I thought it would have been. So we'll see what happens when we get to the desktop. Remember this screen? Didn't shut down your computer properly, so ScanDisk was going to corrupt whatever was left of your files. Not sure this ever helped anybody, to be honest, unless you were using like right behind caching on Smart Drive or something. But they felt it was necessary. Luckily, Tweak UI could deal with that and many other annoyances. Let's see what this thing does when it gets to the desktop. Maybe it just went into a video mode the monitor couldn't display. That'd be about the way this video has gone so far. 40 minutes worth of this crap. Ooh, a snake. And what is that, a panther? A black panther? It was Ogden Nash who said it best when he said, if called by a panther, don't answer. This is one of the Microsoft Plus themes, if you're wondering where the wallpaper comes from. As well as the mouse cursors, things like that. This was for people with, I think, highly questionable taste in fonts and stuff. I'm not sure anybody thought that actually looked good. I am curious, though. How accurate do you suppose the real-time clock is on that thing? After not seeing power for basically the past, at least 10 years or so. Let's see, what is the clock set to? I'll go ahead and bring up the clock on this machine. It says it's almost 2 o'clock in the morning. And that's probably not far off. At least it's not terribly far off. About a half an hour out. So we'll go ahead and crank it back here a little bit. 52 versus 25. That's almost a palindrome. That's your word for the day. You know what that is? That's a number that reads the same. Actually, it's not a palindrome. I'm a moron. Especially at these early hours of the morning. No. Or maybe it is. Who knows? I don't know anything. I'm a dum-dum. But obviously the battery on this thing is still keeping some kind of a time. So let's see what kind of programs are on here. Okay, I know one thing we're going to do right away. I am a patient person, but my patience is about to be exhausted with this kind of thing. I am very much I don't really care about the leopard wallpaper. In fact, the Black Panther, I'm sorry. Don't really care about that, but I'm going to go ahead and change things back here to the Windows standard colors. Such an enormous breath of fresh air. And you know the next thing I'm going to do? I am going to the control panel's mouse pointer section. I am changing the mouse pointer scheme to something normal. It's funny how people can be so very opinionated about that. I actually like the extra large standard mouse pointers. Fun little diagnostic tip. If you're trying to enable animated mouse pointers and stuff on Windows 9X and Millennium family products and they won't enable, check the system control panel. Make sure that nothing is running in MS-DOS compatibility mode. See, there's nothing running in that mode. 32 megabytes of RAM. I have no idea who that person is. Who knows, maybe this was a third or even fourth hand computer by the time my aunt got it. Very hard to tell. Unsupported device. Lovely. Network adapters just for dial-up. Like I say, this machine doesn't have anything like that on it. Probably was an option. I've seen a few 486 systems late in the 486 era that had onboard Ethernet. It also thinks that my monitor is a standard 640 by 480 type, which is most definitely not correct, so we better go and fix that. Okay, I have returned after several more minutes worth of fiddling. I accomplished several things. Went ahead and gave myself more screen real estate, the furthest I could get with this particular machine, which is completely in line with my expectations, considering its 1 megabyte of video memory, is an 800 by 600 resolution. Anything higher than that, and you'd need a video memory upgrade to stay in high color mode. So it drops back to 256 colors there. Also went ahead and changed the desktop icons back to what they are supposed to be. The Windows defaults. Don't get me wrong, I could play around with the desktop themes control panel right along with the best of them back in the day, but sometimes there are just things for which the time has truly passed, or at least I have matured enough to where I'm no longer interested in them, although saying that I have matured is definitely something of a dubious assertion. Go ahead and close this out. Discovered something interesting when I cranked up the screen resolution. Apparently somebody had a window that they just didn't quite know how to get rid of, despite the little tiny X button here in the background. You are about to close a toolbar window. Isn't that special? And, well, I certainly have no problem looking around at documents on old computers. They are typically not anything that I would make a member of the public record. But just to show you how times change, I had to share this with you. This thing is running Microsoft Office 97. You can see Microsoft Word down here in the taskbar. I have never used a version of Microsoft Office, never owned. I have used. I will take that back. I have never owned a version of Microsoft Office any newer than 2003. I just totally lost interest in the product around the time that Microsoft said, ribbons, ribbons, ribbons are the way forward. No, ribbons really make me do nothing short of want to bay for their author's blood anytime I have ever tried to interact with them. I hate those things. I have mentioned in the past that I do not dislike Windows 8 with a start menu, but the ribbons are definitely pushing it. I wish those would go away sooner rather than later. Such a waste of screen layout, and I have never, despite using them quite often, at least within the Windows 8 shell, I've just never been able to get used to them. I don't know, maybe that means I'm becoming an old fuddy-duddy, but to get back to the point, Office 2000 and later, Office 2000 introduced what they called the single document interface, which was to say that every time you opened a new document, it spawned a new button on the taskbar, a new window with its own controls and everything. A single window per every document. Now in Excel and PowerPoint, you could turn that option off. You could turn it off in Access as well. But somehow Microsoft Word 2000 never got that capability. I could tell a funny story about that, but we're getting close to an hour's worth of video here before editing, so I'll just skip it for right now. And if anybody wants to know it, maybe I'll put it in the video description. But of course, Microsoft Word 97 doesn't work that way. It is a multiple document interface program, and I am ashamed to admit, well, maybe not totally ashamed to admit, put the toolbar back where it belongs there, because again, that was just kind of bugging me. I am kind of ashamed to admit that it took me a while when I was looking through the documents on the most recently used items menu. I was like, where are they all going? I'm opening them, but I'm not seeing the multiple taskbar buttons. And then it was like a light went on. It was like, oh, multiple document interface. So every document lives inside the same parent window. Apparently someone was in love with someone by the name of Brian. They didn't just do that once. They actually did it multiple times. Fun with auto shapes is what I guess we call that. And then, is this word art? Yeah, this is word art. I think that's still alive and well in current Microsoft products. Yep, that is definitely Microsoft Word art, along with some rather erratic capitalization there. The people who used this computer, and I don't believe that was my aunt, appear to have used it as recently as 2004 based on the dates of the file names. It also appears that they were none too concerned about using the things that Microsoft provided within the operating system to store their documents, like, say, the confusingly named My Documents folder. No, they created their own. They called it Docs. And to answer your question, I'm sure you're all wondering just as much as I have, does the CD-ROM drive work? Well, not only does the CD-ROM drive appear to be capable of reading discs, it looks like there's actually a disc in it. I don't recognize that volume label. I have no idea what that is, and I don't know that I can give this thing enough room to open the tray, but let's see if the tray actually will open under software control. By golly, it did. And what do we have here? Well, we have somebody who is a pretty poor shot. They shot up their Dear Avenger 3D CD-ROM. Let's see, how old is this? Copyright 2000. I'm sure that wasn't a whole heck of a lot of fun to play on an early Pentium machine, especially a low-end one like a Pentium 75. Well, I have certainly rambled on long enough in the exploration of this computer, don't you think? Go ahead and take a quick look in the device manager real quick, see if there's anything of any great interest in there, like maybe a DMA-capable hard drive controller, not a floppy drive, you stoop. Nope, it's programmed I/O only, at least as far as Windows is concerned, and that includes both the hard and CD-ROM drives. Let's see, CMD PCI 640, PCI to IDE controller, Creative Labs IDE controller, and a primary IDE controller with a single first-in, first-out, or FIFO buffer. Standard keyboard. It's actually a 33.6 modem. Shows 2 COM ports. Well, one of them's the modem. That's how late it's getting. Starting to get really screwed up here, you know. And then system devices. Don't really see anything too terribly interesting in there. Pretty much what you would expect to see for a system such as this. But it just occurred to me, one thing I could check. I could see if this machine has a processor that is impacted by the floating point division bug that affected Pentiums up to at least 133, maybe even 150 megahertz. I think Intel will still replace those processors to this day, but you don't get anything other than a like replacement. But this one is working properly. This one does not have that issue. I have only seen a very few Socket 7 processors, such as this one, that would have that particular issue. But they do come up from time to time. Got some games here, the Windows Entertainment Pack, Bicycle Solitaire, Scrabble. I'm not very good at those, and games aren't really my thing, so I don't think I'm going to play any of those. Plus, we're at 51 minutes, almost 52, before I edit this video down, and I'm sure you would all like me to stop talking about this long-forgotten computer and get this video uploaded. So thank you for watching if you have made it this far, and by all means, most certainly do feel free to leave a comment if you should happen to have one. Believe me when I say that if this thing decides to blow up, you are most certainly going to hear it. Without further ado, smoke test! I've screwed it up. I didn't plug the power cord in.